Hey everyone, in this video I wanted to take a look at the book of Daniel and just put it in the light of some of the things that we've seen happen here in our lifetimes. And I just want to put it in an end time perspective. And we talk about end times, I mean, there's so much division and there's so many different camps of how people believe that rather to get down into the absolute specifics of what's going to happen and when it's going to happen, I want to take the broad overview of it. So you can't see the forest for the trees. You don't want to be in that position. So this prophecy that happens in the second chapter of the book of Daniel deals with a dream that King Nebuchadnezzar had. Now in the dream he saw this statue, and the statue had all of these elements to it: a golden head, a chest and arms made out of silver, a stomach and thighs of bronze, legs of iron, and then feet of iron and clay. And in the second chapter of the book of Daniel, Daniel actually tells the king what his dream was, because the king didn't even reveal what the dream was. He wanted somebody who had the ability to see not only what the dream was, but what the interpretation of it was. And nobody could do that in all the land except for Daniel, because God gave him the vision to see what the dream was and the ability to understand it. So understand that the Babylonian kingdom existed from approximately, let's say, 606 BC to 536 BC. So that's what we see here. This was the time that the prophecy was given for this. It began with this kingdom of Babylon. So right now I'm going to be looking, this is the eSword. It's free. You can download it. You can download all the different Bible translations, make comparisons with the original Hebrew and Greek words that were used. Just for the sake of the purists out there, I'm using the King James Version. And this is what Daniel said. It said, Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image, the great image whose brightness was excellent, and stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. The image's head was of fine gold, and here he goes to basically give the illustration that I just gave you here, this image. There's a lot of images like this online that you can see. Here's a modern version. Okay, but let's get back to these. Okay, so starting in the verse 37, this is where the actual interpretation of the dream is given. Okay, so in the 37th verse he says that Nebuchadnezzar was the king of kings in the world at that time, and that God had given him the kingdom and the power, the strength to be where he was. And then in the 39th verse he said, just one last thing, the 30th verse, he says, Thou art the head of gold. So he just came right out and told him that that's you, that's your kingdom here. But after thee shall rise another kingdom inferior to thee. So that was the second kingdom, which we see represented here by the silver, arms of silver, and that was an inferior kingdom. It's basically two kingdoms, the kingdoms of the Medes and the Persians that ruled at that time. Historically, that would be, let's say, 536 BC to about 332 BC. And then another. This was after the second Medo-Persian kingdom came a third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. So this was 239 AD. Now, one of the things you have to realize that when it talks about the earth, it talks about that part of the world at the time, because of course the place that we know as the United States of America, where I live, and I'm speaking from North America, that was around today, but there was no Greek kingdom there, right? It's talking about that part of the world. That was the earth to them at the time. That was the known earth. So that's the kingdom of ancient Greece, also represented here in this image. So I just want to put that out there, because some people are trying to fit these Bible prophecies into their modern perspective. But in order to see as they saw it, the vision that God gave them so they can understand their own time, you have to put yourself back in the time that this was given in. So this was given back in the Babylonian Empire. So he was looking forward We're looking back, and it gives you a completely different perspective. So by putting yourself in Daniel's shoes and looking forward, then these things make a lot more sense than looking back and then starting to take things out of context. So the third kingdom, and then is the kingdom of brass, and then the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron. So after that was the Roman Empire. So this is all historical fact, all historical record that people really don't dispute. That there was a Babylonian kingdom. Uh, People try and do historical revisionism and say, oh, maybe this person didn't exist or that person didn't exist. But right now, we're looking just at the big picture. Nobody's disputing that these kingdoms existed, right? Because there's plenty of evidence. So the legs of iron represent the Roman Empire, and that lasted from, let's say, 65 BC to approximately 475 AD. Let's pull this back up here. The fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, or breaks things in pieces, and subdues all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. So the Roman Empire was just like unlike any empire that came before. It was just a wrecking machine. And you can look back at old maps and see where that kingdom stretched to. So when it said it ruled the earth, again, I'm sure there were people living in the Americas at the time and they weren't ruling over them. So we're talking about the earth in the perspective of the person at that time, what they saw from their perspective, from Daniel's perspective. Okay, so now after the Roman Empire falls, the Roman Empire gets divided. So when the Roman Empire gets divided into two, basically how the fall started, we say it can get divided between two major generals, but not to get really deep into that. You can look into that if you want on your own. But it says, whereas thou sawest the feet and the toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided, and there shall be in it the strength of iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with the miry clay, and as the toes of the feet were part iron and part clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. That's what we have after the Roman Empire, and that's what we still have today. Now, here's the thing about this. In the days of these kings, meaning in the days that came after the Roman Empire, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And this kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all of these kingdoms. All meaning not just some, but all. And it shall stand forever. So here in this picture, you can see this rock, and the artist broke the toes off of it in pieces made out of clay. I mean, what we saw and what we've been seeing is a drive to create a new world order, which is basically the old world order in which a kingdom would rule the entire earth, but even bigger, that would consume the entire populated of all the populated lands on earth. But it's unable to come to pass. Why? Because God sets something up and crushes those aspirations, because their strength is not the strength of the kingdoms that preceded it. There wasn't clay in any of these previous kingdoms, but there is in the one now. So people talk about that they couldn't believe that Britain the other day exited from the Eurozone, because they thought that Europe would be a new world power. But the thing is these powers, this one world system, this one world government, it will not come together again. It will not stand. It can't, because God himself is opposing it. What does it say here? Again, for as much as thou sawest the stone that was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces. What did the stone do? Who's known as the stone or the rock in the Bible? You can answer that question for yourself. That the stone broke in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold. So that means that all of these kingdoms were defeated basically by the same stone. And the last kingdom is the one that is represented by the feet. The final kingdom that Daniel saw back in the days of Nebuchadnezzar as he looked forward. So think about what these scripture verses mean. I mean, if you really want to look into the New World Order and you're really into that, of all the pieces, then you can see that what they did after World War II was they divided up the world into 10 sections. This would be the new order that would be under one government. But what happens? What happens is that just as we have 10 sections here, what do you see on the statue here? You have 2 feet, 5 toes on each feet, which means 10 toes altogether. And what happens to those toes? What happens to the feet? It's crushed by the rock. So I think that, are we just pulling things out and trying to make world events fit into Bible prophecy? I've seen that since the 1970s, since Hal Lindsey wrote The Late Great Planet Earth, and then again Countdown to Armageddon in the 1980s. I've seen it with books such as 88 Reasons Why Christ Will Return in 1988. We've seen the predictions and the prophecies of Harold Camping. We've seen things as such an asteroid supposed to hit in 2012. All of these things, and when people make predictions like that, then all they're basically doing is they're discrediting themselves, and they're being a poor representation of the Bible. They're representing false information. I think that's why the Bible says that there's not many among you that ought to be teachers, knowing that teachers of the Bible will receive a stricter judgment. Because when you put something out there that's not true and people take it to heart, it affects their lives. So there's people out there putting messages of fear all the time. Fear that you might be accidentally taking the mark of the beast, or fear that all of the people are going to be rounded up and herded like animals, and all of these things all these evil things are happening. And basically these people make the devil seem, and the satanic dark kingdom, seem like it's so powerful that the light is just like a little flashlight over in the corner. But when you read the Bible and you see the whole story, because Daniel was given the entire picture here in the 2nd chapter, looking forward not only for his people but for all peoples, you can see what would happen with these kingdoms. And the last kingdom, the one where they try and mix the iron and the clay, they don't mix together. You can see right here in the 43rd verse, it says, "Whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men." So whether this is talking about supernatural beings trying to do what they did in the beginning with women that produced the mighty men of old, whether they're trying to do that again, it's not going to work. It actually says right here, they shall not cleave to one another. Iron and the clay won't mix. Or whether that's talking about transhumanism, or whether that's simply talking about the unrighteous seed trying to dilute the righteous seed of men. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of interpretations, but whatever interpretation you take, you can't get rid of these words that it doesn't work. They don't cleave to one another. This 10-nation New World Order thing, it doesn't work because the iron and the clay don't mix with one another. This is a weaker kingdom. It says it right here. And I know that as you go from day-to-day life and you read in the media, it may seem like this New World system is so powerful that there's been nothing like it ever again, or never shall there be another kingdom like the one that's been setting up right now. But according to the Bible, it says the kingdom shall be, this last kingdom, partially strong and partly broken. So again, people talk about Britain leaving, or Greece probably leaving eventually, or the European Union falling apart. What do we see? It's just like the old nursery rhyme of the Roman Empire falling. Humpty Dumpty, all the king's horses and all the king's men couldn't put Humpty back together again. So the kings of these iron and clay kingdoms are going to be broken in pieces. So let me just leave that here. Hopefully I've given you something to think about, that you can just put the big red X through this whole New World Order thing. It's not going to consume everybody. It's not going to succeed. It's going to be broken in kingdoms by another kingdom. And that kingdom is here now. And thank God you can be a part of it. All it takes is the personal faith and personal belief in Jesus. And that transforms you out of the darkness and into the light. Anyway, thanks for listening. This is Jim, and we'll talk to you.